everyone, and welcome back to Ancient City Creatives, produced from La Casa Studios in St. Augustine, Florida. This is where we highlight the voices, stories, and talents that are shaping St. Augustine's vibrant creative scene. Each episode, we feature local artists, makers, performers, and innovators who bring fresh energy into Creative City. Today, I am joined with the amazing Jim Gilmore, a filmmaker, director, and educator. He's currently here for the St. Augustine Film Festival, as well as, obviously teaching A Book of Freedom, The Confessions of Francisco Menendez. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, and it is so nice to be here. Thank you for
I'm
having me.
so glad you're here. Thanks for coming. So my first question is, just for listeners and those who may not know you yet, how do you describe what you do, both at Flagler and beyond that?
So I describe myself as a documentary filmmaker and educator. So I never intended to get into documentary film. I studied film in college, and I always wanted to make movies. I made movies in junior high and in high school, and I just kept doing it. And I thought, I'm going to go to California, and I'm going to go to LA, and I'm going to do the whole thing. And then when I actually got out of grad school and started, my jobs kept moving me farther and farther east and northeast. And I ended up getting into nonfiction and ended up really loving it because the real stories are actually better than anything I could ever make up in my own head. And so to be a documentary filmmaker in this world means you've got to find a way to survive if you're Ken Burns. That way is General Motors, or was. But if not, you look for some other avenues, and I got into teaching too. I had a master's degree from the University of Iowa, which opened doors in terms of teaching in higher education.
Oh, for sure. What did you get your degree in?
So it was in broadcasting and film production at the University of Iowa. Back in the day, they only had the MA degree. They didn't have an MFA. They didn't think it was very valuable. And so I ended up with a master's in production, which helped me get jobs originally. And again, I never really thought about teaching, but ultimately when I did, because I had the master's degree, it meant I could teach at the college level.
Oh, for sure. And speaking of you teaching, the reference of film for Book of Freedom is a collaboration with 60 Flagler students, for those who don't know. And it's premiering this weekend. It's actually the closing film of the St. Augustine Film Festival. What does that moment represent to you personally?
It's really exciting and it's really fulfilling. So I've been in higher education for 33 years. Now, some of those years was as a producer-director in public television stations associated with Penn State University and the University of New Hampshire. But I've been teaching as an assistant or associate or full or now visiting professor for 27 of those years.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was invited to come back to Flagler and help them put together this new cinematic arts program, it was really an opportunity to kind of design a program the way I felt it always should be, which was, how do we create a program where we essentially make a film with the students that's not just little student films, but is something much bigger than that, that is a programmatic part of what we do. And so in launching the Cinematic Arts program, we came up with this idea to do something about Fort Mose, and that was the birthplace of A Book of Freedom, which became a documentary that the students wrote and the students produced and the students did all the location releases for, and they did all the production of, and they did all the editing, with me as a kind of supervising director in a way, but also really trying to give them all experiences on set. And it's just been so fulfilling and so amazing to see them kind of come up to that level and have that opportunity. And I'm like, yes, this is the way all these years I should have been teaching production.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to get to that point of, I guess, teaching in your own way. Not that you necessarily have to follow a set curriculum, especially when it comes to filmmaking, but opening those doors for students who may not have had an opportunity like this to actually, get into filmmaking, make a film, and of course with your direction. And as you say, you have expertise in documentary series and making films. When this project first began, what initially started the idea to share the story of Francisco Menendez and Fort Mose?
So I had lived in St. Augustine before. I was here from 2000 to 2008. So I was obviously aware of Fort Mose and the basics of the history of St. Augustine. I knew a little bit about the history of civil rights. I helped some students do a film called Dare Not Walk Alone many years ago, which was about the civil rights movement here in St. Augustine. And so when I came back and was thinking about what kind of story could we tell, what could be the first film, my background, as you mentioned, is in documentary, so I thought maybe we could do something more like a docudrama. Because I don't have that, I'm not bringing that kind of Hollywood experience in that someone that focused primarily on narrative film would bring. Let's play to my strengths as the visiting filmmaker. And so the story that just came to mind is let's do something, a docudrama based around the history of Fort Mose. And of course, if you start to do some research about Fort Mose, you find pretty quickly that there is this one character, Francisco Menendez, who is the hero of the story in a very traditional narrative sense, in that he escapes from slavery, he comes down to Florida, he fights the British, he beats the British, he loses everything in doing that. The first Fort Mose is burned down. He's distraught. He goes to petition the King of Spain. He joins a group of essentially pirates, gets recaptured by the British, re-enslaves, escapes again. And I'm like, oh my God, you can't make this stuff up. This is a great superhero movie, right? And so let's use that character as the basis of this film.
Well, I actually haven't seen the film yet. I'm seeing it. If you would like to, Sunday, 4:15 at the Lewis Auditorium.
Lewis Auditorium.
At Flagler College.
Yep.
That's where you can see the premiere. I'm excited to see it, of course, but primarily because I had never, first, I'm not from St. Augustine. I moved here when I was like 17 years old, but I am a Florida native. So I had come to St. Augustine when I was in first grade, I think. You know, they take you to the old jail. You go see, they shoot off a fake gun with real gunpowder.
Yeah, they do.
But I had never heard of Fort Mose, and so I was very interested that, one, not only was it such an intriguing story, but one that no one had been sharing.
Right.
And so, you know, Fort Mose holds an incredibly important place in American history, but people like myself are very unfamiliar with it. Why do you think that story has been overlooked in such a manner?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, number one, Fort Mose is not right here downtown, and everybody kind of paints St. Augustine as this little sort of circle.
St. George Street, that's it.
Yeah, around the fort and the gates.
Yes.
Right. Well, outside the gates, the escaped slaves were put on the front lines, not surprisingly, in their own fort called Fort Mose. And so we created, kind of as part of this project, a separate documentary called Florida's Forgotten Fort, because historically we kind of forgot that that was there. And there's also a legacy of racism, quite frankly, that in terms of celebrating stories of American history, a lot of the stories that were not celebrated were stories of Black Americans. And I think there was a time here in the 50s and in the 60s where the acknowledgement of a fort run primarily by escaped slaves that defeated the British went against the narrative of 1950s, 1960s America. And so that's part of the reason I think it's so important to tell this story. I think certainly students these days are learning more about Fort Mose, but if you ask people around the rest of the country, nobody's ever heard of the fact that the very first Underground Railroad went south to St. Augustine.
And I think it also speaks on a grander theme when it comes to St. Augustine, the city, where, as much as I love St. Augustine, this is a tourist spot. A lot of people come here to see the things that we all know of, the fort, St. George Street, the Bridge of Lions, whatever it may be. And reaching beyond that then separates people from that, like, you know, vacation mode, let's relax, it brings them back to, this is a historical place. And that can be somehow triggering or just a very emotional topic to discuss on a place that you might just, want to have fun. Right. But I think that sharing that story, especially having students be the ones to share that story, is a great way to open up the conversation about what St. Augustine is and the history of it. So I thank you for that. So the film blends documentary research with dramatic reenactments. How did you approach honoring historical truth with these students while still trying to craft something cinematic?
That's a great question, because it's really hard to do. Like, you're really trying to balance sort of the historical evidence that you can find at places like the St. Augustine Historical Society. I mean, records exist. We know of the letters that Francisco Menendez wrote to the King of Spain, petitioning for money, right? And so we could use some of those pieces. But how do we possibly take these parts of documentary evidence and turn it into kind of an engaging story? And so one of our big challenges was coming up with a device that would do that, kind of a literary device, if you will. And so we sort of said to ourselves, imagine if Francisco Menendez had kept something like a diary or a scrapbook. And imagine if, on the eve of him having to leave St. Augustine, because one of the tragedies of Fort Mose is once Spain cedes Florida, La Florida, back to Britain, the escaped slaves don't have a choice. If they stay, they're going back to slavery. So they, for the most part, everybody that was in Fort Mose leaves and goes to Cuba with the Spanish. But imagine it's on the eve of that departure. And you had a man who has essentially a diary who he wants to pass on to somebody to keep safe, to keep his story alive. And so we created a moment that does not exist historically, but exists as a matter of fiction, of imagine if this existed, this kind of scrapbook, and he was passing it off to Father Juan, and we know there was a Father Juan at Fort Mose, the priest, to say, take care of our story and preserve it for when the world is ready to hear it.
That's great.
And so that becomes the literary device around which, and why we call it a book of freedom, is imagine if Francisco Menendez had kept that kind of book.
And that has to like invest the students to a certain degree of like really reimagining, and at a certain point imagining, because it doesn't exist, what that looks like at such a crucial and important time in history.
Right.
Wow.
And the big challenge is, sort of ethically, how far creatively can you go that isn't too far?
Oh, sure, for sure.
And then pull back on that.
How did you mitigate that?
It's a real challenge. We had a writer's room that we started with, right? So we had a number of student writers. We brought in another professional writer, a former colleague of mine, Nadia Ramatar. She used to teach at Flagler, and she used to be here local in St. Augustine, and she had been part of helping the very first Fort Mose Historical Society get created. And so she came in and worked with the students. We had a former alum, Jeffrey Spivey, who'd been one of our journalism students, who came in to talk about things like agency and representation, and how do we try to do this justice and yet still be allowed to make it entertaining and interesting, all within the confines of a really small budget by Hollywood standards, right?
Yeah.
And that, and so one of the nice things about a Book of Freedom is it allowed us to bring in illustrations. It allowed us to bring in things. We couldn't rebuild Fort Mose. We didn't have the budget to do that. But we could get some of the students in the art department to draw illustrations of what it might have looked like to include into the scrapbook that we could use as visuals within the film. So some of this became just creative problem solving. How do you deal with a small budget when you have a big historical fictional story to tell?
Well, I feel like there's no better way to build resilience in filmmaking than to actually do it.
Oh, yeah.
So, and in such a way that is creative at the same time, too. So I read that you've said that the film doesn't fit neatly into a traditional student film category. How did decision-making work, at least even just like with the workflow on this film with so many students collaborating creatively?
Right. And it really varied semester to semester. So one of the reasons this isn't a traditional student film is there isn't like a student director, right? And it was done over the course of 5 semesters. So for instance, the writing room was one semester where the writers had things to solve, problems to solve. Then it went to a producing directing class, which did all of the pre-production, which had to take that script and say, some of this was great, some of this we can't do. How do we reformulate it to make it into something workable that we can actually film in the summer? The editing class had to do the same thing with the footage. Like, now that we have this, how do we kind of take it all together? So every semester sort of kind of who was in charge of things shifted and changed. And so when you go to apply to like film festivals as student films, they expect there to be like a student director.
Yeah.
I have like 65 student directors.
Yeah.
Or maybe not 65, but over a dozen of people who were heavily involved in the entire creative process.
And were the semesters like consecutive? Like it was once. So I did not go to school for filmmaking, but I went for communications, and I did a lot of not like smaller feature, like more like news reporting type stuff.
Yeah.
And most of the time, it was just like one semester, month basis, you make 3 features.
Right.
The students would usually carry on through the same class, but you're doing different projects, and it's kind of flipped this way where it's one project, and now. My question is, were there any students who just like followed through with the film when it came to their curriculum?
There's a few. So there's just a handful of students that were like there all the way from the writer's room through the editing room.
Wow.
So one that comes to mind is a student named Kyle Miller, who was part of the original writer's room. He ended up becoming the script supervisor, which is in charge of continuity on the film. In the producing room, he helped with like location releases and the like. He was involved in the editing aspect, and then even last fall when we were doing the final sound mixing, he was over at Eclipse Studios with me on US 1 South doing that. So for a few students, they got to see the whole thing. The idea was when we designed, and my colleague Tracy Halcomb, who was a professor at Flagler in communication, who became part of cinematic arts, part of our philosophy was, let's see if we can come up with an idea where a visiting filmmaker would come in for 3 or 4 years with one film that they make throughout that time, and the students have a chance to be part of that through their entire academic experience. Because there aren't internships in real filmmaking here in Florida.
No.
And so we have to kind of create that. And so the idea is once I'm done at the end of this semester, a new visiting filmmaker will come in with a new film to make and a new set of students, and the curriculum will keep moving forward.
Oh, I love that. I'm very jealous.
Well, and I think, we really have to look at how does higher education need to change.
Oh, especially with emerging and new technology.
Oh, so much.
Also, I mean, just like the idea of curriculum in general and what is considered filmmaking to a certain degree.
Right.
Because, now if you can go on Sona and just type in a prompt, does that make you a director? Does that make you an editor? Who knows?
Right.
But reverting, and not even reverting, just like, flipping the script per se on how students can learn. And I do love the fact that it did take 5 semesters to film, because that is, in my opinion, setting students up for success, that good things take time.
Right.
Especially making a film of this nature and of this degree. And also doing it maybe for the first time.
Right.
You never know. You never know what problems you might have to mitigate. So you are not from St. Augustine, but you've been here for how long?
I'm originally from the Chicago suburbs, but so I came to St. Augustine first in 2000 to 2008, and then I came back in 2022-ish. We were planning to kind of retire down here, and when some of my former colleagues heard that, they said, "Hey, we have this idea. We're thinking cinematic arts. And could we get you interested?" And we got talking, and eventually they did. And I said, yeah, but I want to do this kind of different.
And you did that,
Yeah.
which, good job. I know how hard it is to get your ideas in filmmaking, or at least to get people to believe it without, actually, you got to convince them somehow, some way to make something before you can actually show it to them.
Right.
So how does you're familiar enough with St. Augustine, how does being rooted in St. Augustine itself for the film and yourself, not just as a setting, but as a community, even at Flagler College, how did that shape the storytelling of the film?
Well, this is a very local story, right? And so we approached the folks at the Fort Mose Historical Society and just said, hey, here's kind of what we want to do. We would like your blessing, your kind of permission to do it. We just don't want to come in and say, we're going to tell the story of Fort Mose as some, there's a billion ways you could tell that story. But we wanted them involved. We got them involved. They had an opportunity to talk to us about the script. They had an opportunity to talk to us about the edit and what we cut together. and give us feedback on that. It didn't mean that they controlled the project, but we really tried to make them a part of all of this.
You want to honor them. I
Right.
mean, if that's where your story is coming out of, you don't, especially as you mentioned, there are some literary devices that had to be created to imagine the story the way that you wanted to tell it.
Right.
You have to make sure that you're honoring that truth.
And explain that, right? Because some people would be like, well, this doesn't seem like, this didn't really happen. And
Yeah.
we're like, no, we understand that didn't happen. This did happen. But here's why we're doing this. We're not calling this a documentary. We're calling this a docudrama. And there is this very specific difference. But you want to go in there and try to explain that. We wanted to do what we could to try to give agency to these characters. So we started with Dr. Halcomb, myself, and Nadia Ramatar, who helped with the writer's room. We started by interviewing people who had been instrumental in establishing the Fort Mose Historical Society, to use those interviews as a resource we could share with the students to be part of the basis of the script. And then those interviews, we liked them so much that Dr. Halcomb, myself, and Nadia Ramatar said, let's put these together as sort of a separate short called Florida's Forgotten Fort, which we kind of used to introduce the film on Sunday. So that's something we kind of put together out of those interviews that is more documentary in nature, but still was really used as a resource for the students, because it's so important you find ways to connect to whatever community you're trying to represent.
Oh, for sure. And we do that here at the podcast anyway. That's what Ancient City Creatives is about getting, and not necessarily, you don't have to be from St. Augustine, but utilizing your community to your advantage to tell a story for a community, very important.
Oh,
and yeah. I'm excited to see what you've done, especially for at least both the docudrama and kind of that documentary part of it.
And in some ways, there's an advantage to being an outsider. I've always found that with my documentary work, is that kind of coming in, I'm a little bit stupid about things. And so people have to explain things to me and have to talk to me and have to tell me their stories in ways that helps. If it's somebody who lived in town, they would sort of just shrug it off and say, well, they kind of know all of this stuff.
Exactly.
To me, they actually have to restate it. And that's really important.
Especially for your audience.
Right.
I mean, ideally, the majority of your audience are people that don't know. You're trying to tell a story. You're trying to get a message across.
Right.
They don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're able to do it in a way that is not only truthful, researched, but also collaborative and respecting the community and history, that is a feat. Was there a moment during production where the emotional or historical weight of the story itself, that you were recreating history, quite literally, visually? Was there a moment that really hit for you?
Yeah, so when this was the second place that we were filming. So we were at the Colonial Quarter. They very graciously let us use what they call their print shop, and we kind of recreated that into Francisco Menendez's Fort Mose house, right? And we're there, and I'm working with a wonderful actor who was a Flagler College acting student, but an older acting student. He had been in the military and then come back on the GI Bill to come get his degree, named Zeus Xavier Scott, and he's in there, and he is having this conversation with the priest about the abuse that Francisco Menendez went through and the intensity of some of those scenes. And I mean, it was hot, because to film there, we had to get there at like 3:30 in the morning, and we could film from like 4 a.m. until 10.
Was this in the Florida summer?
Oh, yeah. We're doing this in the summer, so it's like 90 degrees in that little hot hut. I'm there with a giant iced coffee. But we're dealing with these really complex emotional scenes of, imagine that you are this man who has escaped slavery twice, who has been beaten, who has been abused, and you are just trying to figure out how to get your story out there. And you could see it in the actor's face, sort of the intensity of kind of what we're dealing with here. And, you kind of go, wow, I hope I can pull this off. I mean, like, we were crazy anyway. Like, why am I doing a historical drama for the very first thing we ever did with this cinematic arts program? But let's just go all the way. But I saw for a moment there, I'm like, I think we might be able to make something work here.
Well, I'm excited to see that specific moment. Honestly, that was a personal question, because I really want to be like, okay, I'm going to put myself in your shoes and be like, what was it like to make a film of this nature for this specific scene? And I can only imagine too. I mean, just the, you know, personal feelings for not only you, but everyone involved. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own history. And to be able to see and look and actually visualize that you're creating something with all of that skill and talent, I'm sure you're very excited and very...
Yeah, and also just to watch the students see that unfold and happen in front of them, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because you're doing just a little student project on your own, like you're kind of rushing through a semester and you're just doing something. It's like, I got to get it done.
Yeah.
Right, but here they are and they're watching this, you know, and we're doing sometimes on these emotional scenes, we're doing 12, 15, 20 takes. And they're watching that. They're watching the toldest takes on the actors and their language that they helped write in the script. And I think they're starting to make connections that you don't get to see in a classroom.
Exactly.
And that's the wonderful thing.
That's
where
incredible.
I could go back and like, okay, I think this might work.
So I kind of wanted to transition into the education aspect a little bit more. So you've described the project as redefining how film production is taught at Flagler. Other than, I guess, maybe, you know, taking 5 semesters to film one docudrama, what changes in the classroom can you see or that you hope to see because of this film?
Sure. So the first thing is the cinematic arts program was designed to be interdisciplinary. So we pull from courses in theater arts, in communication arts, in creative writing, and in art and illustration, right? So we're pulling from all these different majors, and we're asking the students to kind of, you know, make some choices about, do you see yourself more in the writing side of things, more in the technical side of things, communication-wise, more in the acting, costume design, stage design kind of things, what it might be. So there's that aspect to it. And then we've also introduced within the major what we call the St. August Shorts Film Festival. So in March, the students actually, we've now been running, this will be our 3rd year running. The students have curated, and all the submissions that come in, these short films, and part of the curriculum in class, different classes are assigned different kinds of films. So my documentary class reviews the documentaries. Or my Intro to Cinematic Arts class may be looking at the fictional narrative films. And then they go through and they pick what it is that we should program and make as part of our film festival. So again, what we're doing in the classroom connects to something much bigger in the community. And I'm really trying to pull us out of the mindset of there's like these little finite student projects, and you're here in this 4-year experience where you are part of a bigger film, where you are involved for 3 or 4 years in a film festival, actively involved introducing the filmmakers, meeting them, having workshops with them, those kinds of things.
Setting them up for success.
Right.
Yeah.
And just, you know, let's get out of this sort of notion of college is just like these little classes and credits that you do, and it's these bigger opportunities. Because frankly, like if I want to learn how to edit, I can go onto AI now and it'll show me how to edit, show me how to run a camera.
Oh, yeah.
It'll show me how to do all those things that we used to have to teach in a classroom. But it doesn't show you how to work together. It doesn't show you the stress of a team showing up at 3:30 in the morning. It doesn't show, like, what do you do at the last minute to solve a problem when this location doesn't work out and we have to replace it at the last minute. Those are the kinds of things that higher education needs to figure out how to do now. And I won't pretend that this is gotten there yet, but I do feel like this is at least sort of a start of the direction where teaching film production, media production, where it needs to go.
And I'm glad that it's coming out of St. Augustine, Florida.
Oh, I am
Because
too.
I mean, well, there's so much,
And it's
so much history and content and stories here
Right.
that, not that I don't think that a lot of people aren't familiar with. This is the nation's oldest city, but there's not, again, as you mentioned earlier, there's not much opportunity for students like myself or just people who don't have that experience yet to make something that they didn't even know that they could maybe make where they were.
Right.
And you're giving them that opportunity, which is great.
Yeah, and just everything we have around us is so perfect, right? Like when students say, I can't figure out where to shoot my film, I'm just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like walk out the door for 2 blocks. There's like 1,000 different possibilities
Oh my
as a
gosh.
backdrop. Don't even talk to me if you can't figure out that.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
So what, well, you kind of already touched upon this, but what skills what skills can students gain on a major project like this that can't be taught in a lecture or a short assignment or the way that, teaching film was taught before you kind of came along and did this project?
So one thing, like I just entered into the database, like all of the students that are involved in this now all have IMDb credits, Internet Movie Database credits.
Oh, that's great.
And so as soon as you're accepted into a film festival and as soon as you're going to have some kind of public exhibition, you're now eligible for IMDb. So all of those students, all of those credits now are listed. And I've just sent out a big email last week to all of them and said, hey, you now have an IMDb page with your name on it. It's up to you to populate that page with your picture, with future credits that come up. Right, but now, so you're kind of starting with that. So that's one thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one incredible thing.
Right, like right off the
Yeah.
bat. If you've been part of our major now and you were part of this production, you now have an IMDb credit, right, kind of off the bat. And that's how I want you thinking, right? Like it's not just diplomas.
Yes.
It's these other things, these other kind of badges of success that showcase your skills. And so for some of them, and the other thing I think it shows is film is very much, you get into these very specific categories, right? Like most students have no idea what a script supervisor is unless you actually do it. You can talk about it. I could lecture about it all day. They'd be asleep in the back
What is
row,
that? But what does that mean?
Right? But here you are, and you're in charge of all my continuity. And when I would turn to the script supervisor and say, okay, we've got to do another take, I can't remember, was the candle on the left or the candle on the right, and how high up was the candle or how high low. And that student knew that they had to keep taking photographs and things to be able to document continuity everywhere. And I feel like they now have the kind of skills, even if they don't go into that, right? Let's say they go into something completely unrelated to film. They understand the importance of the detail that is required to do a creative job well.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a great answer. So you spent some years in broadcast and professional documentary work. How do you translate those industry level expectations into an academic environment without losing integrity or creativity?
Whew, gosh, I wonder if I did. Like, did I do that? I would like to think I did. So one thing is, if you do this, if you end up teaching in something like I'm teaching, you have to find a way to keep doing it, right? Now, it's not been easy. So like where I used to make like a couple documentaries a year, now it might be a documentary every 4 years or every 5 years because I'm busy teaching. But you've got to kind of keep in it, and so that you can keep relating your experiences to the students. I think that's a really important kind of thing. And I think you have to be willing to show your work a little bit. I try not to like say, here students, look what I did, because then they will want to copy that.
Oh yeah.
And I don't want them to copy my style. I want them to come up with their own style. That is much more important than you looking at a bunch of my films. But I am able to sort of say, when they come back and say to me, there's no way I can get this done. I'm never going to be able to get this done by Friday because XYZ happened. I can say, I have been in that situation. I have had to stay up all night, and I have gotten it done, because if I didn't get it done for broadcast on Friday at 2 p.m., I'd have been fired. And to do that, I had to make something that wasn't perfect. And I need you to figure out how you're going to get this done, and not tell me why it's not going to be perfect, and not tell me that it can't happen. What are you going to do? What are you going to change? What's going to happen for that to happen? Because I'm telling you, I know it can happen. You can't tell me it can't.
Students need that encouragement, and
Right.
and that you say you don't know if it was you setting them up for industry level expectations and like the residual of that, but I think that's pretty much on the nose, at least letting your students know, look, okay, we all have our struggles. We all have, a bump in the road that is going to happen.
Yeah.
the way that I know that you are serious about this is if you are willing to overcome that. If you are willing to jump through those hoops, go over that bump to make something. And of course, yeah, first go around, it doesn't necessarily have to be the most perfect, but if you put all of your effort into it and you honestly and earnestly tried, it's probably going to be perfect anyways, or at least in a realm of
as perfect as it can be, right? There's no filmmaker that thinks what they've done is perfect.
If there is not one thing out there that every single person on this earth is going to say, I like that, I think that was good. Yeah. So there's no reason to try and necessarily achieve that, but you can always try and achieve completion and completion of earnest and honest good work.
Yep. I tell students there are a couple kind of filmmakers. There are students who make films and there are students who talk about making films. And at the end of the day,
I'm stealing that.
You need to be one of the ones that can make it. And that means making films may not be the perfect film, but you made a film.
But you made one.
And you can, I said, I've known a lot of people I went to graduate school with spent their lives talking about the film they were going to make. And I don't know of any film they ever made. I'm like, and I'll take my films as imperfect as they are over the fact of me not making anything.
And now you have 60 students who get to say that they did make a film.
Exactly.
Perfect. So I do know Madison Torres. She that is one example of a student turning this experience into a real job. What does that validation mean to you as an educator?
Well, it means, yes, we've set them loose and they're now able to do what they want to do, right? And that's the goal. I don't expect if 60 students in a cinematic arts program at Flagler College are all going to be directors in Hollywood. That's not going to happen, right? But if they have the confidence to have the creative skills to work in any kind of creative industry that fulfills their passions and goals, I will feel incredibly blessed. Because that's kind of the gift that you can give to them, right? And I try to be very realistic about expectations. We're in a business where every job application you put in, for everyone, there's going to be 100 rejections. You've got to be able to handle 100 rejections. For every film festival I submit to, I'm going to get rejected by 100 film festivals maybe to get into one good film festival. That's the nature of the beast that is this business. And I need you to be ready for that. But if you can find a creative outlet, whether that outlet is local, whether it is regional, whether it is national. I have some former students who are directors of photography on a national scale. I have other students who are happily doing creative things locally, either here in St. Augustine or near Dearborn, Michigan, where I taught before. And I think they're equally fulfilled.
Amazing. I kind of wish that I was your student, but I'm glad that you were able to join me here today. So this is my last question. What's next for you? What do you have going on post Book of Freedom?
So for myself, I'm actually working now on a documentary on higher education.
Wow!
Right? So I'm going to use, I started last semester a little bit. I started doing these like confessionals in my office where I would come in the morning once a week and turn the camera on and just sort of talk about what frustrations and anger and successes and happinesses and all those kinds of things. And then this semester, while I'm teaching this last semester, I'm going to turn the camera over to some of the students and say, film me a little bit. But I also want to film former colleagues. I mean, I think there's a big question to put out there, like, what is higher education going to be? At what point do we say spending $40 or $50 or $60 or $80 or $100,000 a year is just not realistic to be involved in anything except being a doctor or a lawyer? And so how do we think about, how do we redefine it? How do we talk about it? How do we not feel bad about the fact that it needs to change? And so I want to talk to some former deans and some former colleagues and get some things on camera. And God knows what I'll come up with, but that just feels like what I'm going to do next. And that's what I'm working on.
That's great. Very meta almost. Yeah. Making a documentary about making a documentary or docudrama.
And what I don't like about it is like this whole like confessional thing and sort of turning the camera on myself. There's part of it that feels so performative and fake. And yet I'm like, okay, but let's just try it and see what we get. Because if it doesn't work, I'll just cut it out and use something else, right?
That's the beauty of post.
We save it all in post, right?
We will be saving this in post as well.
You
Well,
can cut out all my babble.
I can't do that to you.
You can.
I can't. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jim. It was such a pleasure
You are
chatting
very
with you.
welcome,
I'm
Sophia.
so
It's been a
excited
lot
to
of fun.
see A Book of Freedom this Sunday again, 4:15 at the Lewis Auditorium at Flagler College. Thanks so much, Jim.
You're so very welcome.